Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar on creating a design system, a practitioner's case study. And we have Martin here from UXPin, who's going to be talking about his firsthand experience today in a pretty detailed case study. And with that being said, I will take this over to him.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I'm extremely excited to share this story because I'm really passionate about design systems. And for those of you who actually joined my past webinars on Agile UX or Agile UX documentation, know that I feel comfortable on the verge of design and development. So the place where plenty of people do not feel comfortable, like this is where I actually thrive. And design system is just it's really like that. It's right on the verge of design and development. This is where everything converges. And these days we are hearing a lot about design systems. Almost every design conference has at least a bunch of talks about design systems, and plenty of companies invest quite a lot of capital into developing design systems. You probably heard about Salesforce Lightning or IBM Carbon or the design system from Shopify just recently, and VMware, and like almost every couple of days we are hearing about something new coming up in this space. And it might seem like a trend, like a couple of years ago we would constantly talk about flat design, and before that Metro UI. Like we always have these trends in the design and development industry. This time though, this is not a trend. This is just a brand new way of building digital products, and this is a way to scale design and development in an organization. And we are going to talk about what does it mean to build a design system, how does it look like, and I'm going to share some examples of our own practice. Before we hit the road, just a couple of words about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder at UXPin, and I work on the design operations team. So you might wonder, like, how does it work? So here's the thing. I absolutely love design and development. This is a big passion of mine since the beginning of my career over 10 years ago. And I just cannot stop, right? So naturally, I don't have time anymore to work on projects, and we have much better designers on the team. But some place where my skill set can be really used still to this day is on the verge of design and development. So I started the design operations team at UXPin to start the process of building our design system. And now the team is bigger. We have 4 people on board, but I continue to be very active in that space. My whole background, as you can guess, right, is all in UX design. And I graduated in psychology, right? So I'm one of the designers who actually came to the field initially from cognitive science. So just, there's plenty of us in the field. And I'm passionate about design development at scale. Like this is what keeps me up at night. This is where I spend my time, constantly thinking about how actually design in a growing organization can scale and how development can scale as well. Okay, you might be wondering as well, what is UXPin? So UXPin is the full stack UX platform. So powerful prototyping across all the level of fidelities, agile documentation, and full collaboration all in one package. And we typically serve bigger companies, just as the logos, like the logos you can see on the screen. But having that said, every day, tens of thousands of smaller companies, freelancers, individuals use UXPin to build amazing experiences for their customers. And we started this company with a very clear mission and vision. So we believe that if you apply a very good, solid design process, product development becomes much more efficient, much faster, and the final experience is much better for our users. With that, we build a company with customers in over 150 countries. Our team consists of 70 amazing professionals in 2 offices, Mountain View, where I reside, and Gdańsk in Poland. And we started the company in Poland. Okay, so here's a little bit of a roadmap. I like to do this kind of stuff with my talks. I like to tell people what am I going to talk about, right? So you guys can know exactly what to expect. So first of all, I'm going to share some research that we've done around why actually design systems matter. Then we're going to discuss what is a design system and how we can use that to overcome some of the biggest challenges that many companies face every day. And then finally, we are going to talk about how to build a design system. So all three combined, this is our roadmap for this talk. So let's get started. Hopefully you're ready and excited. I cannot see the chat, but if you are excited, share your excitement on the chat. It's always nice to see. Okay. So as everything in UX Spin, the task of building our design system and our overall interest in the design system started with the research. UX Spin has been started by designers, so research always plays a very, very important role in everything we do. So almost a year ago, I interviewed over 40 design leaders from big organizations, people from IBM and GE and Rackspace and Facebook, and we were talking about the biggest challenges that these leaders and their teams face every single day. The reason we do this kind of stuff, and this is a regular process at UX Spin, we like to go deep into the problems in the industry and solve them naturally, right? This is the foundation of our business. So this series of interviews was really, really special because there was a pattern, and if you do research at your jobs, you know that the best thing about research is the feeling when you see a pattern that repeats itself throughout all their interviews. And the pattern in this series of interviews was that design is nearly impossible to scale. And it's kind of like on this beautiful picture from Unsplash, which I highly recommend for any stock photos. When the company grows, we feel the need to scale design. And it can look like a staircase. Like we see a set of stairs and we feel like, okay, we have to go climb up, right? We have to do something bigger. We have to scale the team. But somehow, typically companies miss completely the flight of stairs. They completely miss it. And sometimes when the need of scale emerges, companies actually go downhill really quickly. Why? First of all, UI, user interface, gradually becomes more and more inconsistent with an addition of additional team members and the bigger load of projects. The more projects we take over, the more inconsistent the UI gradually becomes, right? With the inconsistency, with the growing inconsistency in the user interface, user happiness decreases. And then teams are becoming slower and slower because teams have to manage this growing inconsistency. And all together, like these three factors are absolutely killing the opportunity to scale design and development in big companies. This is what I've heard from design leaders in these big organizations. And it really reminded me of the second law of thermodynamics, if you guys remember that from school. It basically said that in any enclosed system, the entropy, the chaos, constantly grows. So that's really the case in design. And when we started together with my co-founder and an amazing designer, Kamil, we started to discuss this lessons, these key lessons from this research. We started to think like, wait a second, even at UX Spin, and this is still a small company, we definitely felt that inconsistency is gradually growing. Although back then we were still designing pieces of the product. We felt that although we would probably argue that we are pretty good designers, we felt that we are losing something there. The entropy of our system is constantly increasing. And that's the challenge of scaling the design process. So the question is design doomed? Like if the entropy of every enclosed system continues to grow over time, what can we do about it? Can we manage that? So we went back to research, right? Naturally, we went back to research. And this time we moved from our qualitative research, so there's over 40 interviews, to quantitative research. And we surveyed over 3,000 designers working in big companies. And again, we asked them a set of questions about their work. And the key question was, first of all, what is the biggest challenge? Again, right? So it's just like in our interviews with leaders. We wanted to confirm our hypothesis that this is a big challenge because, like something that we felt and a group of 40 people felt about the design process might still be just a function of the small sample size. It might be an accident. So we wanted to confirm before moving forward with anything. And people listed a bunch of problems, but improving UX consistency landed right at the top. So that confirmed that the pain is real. The consistency of experience of users, the consistency of the interface really is something that we all consider, most of us consider really, really painful. So that was one of the questions. Another question was, what is the solution? And the solution mentioned by many of our participants in the research was actually a design system. So we asked people, do they have a pattern library or a design system? Pattern library, like it's a subset of a growing design system. In a way, it's one of the things that we are having in a design system, but there's still a lot of misconceptions about what design system is. So we just decided to ask straightforward this question to all of our participants in the research. And amazingly, not only over 30% of the people, 39 I believe was the correct number, answered that yes, they already have a pattern library of the design system, but even more people are currently working on it, right? So two things added up really nicely. So first of all, people believe that consistent the UX is a really big problem, and then they're building design system, they're investing resources into building a design system or just a pattern library if that's all that they can do at this particular moment. So when at the very beginning of the talk, I said design system is not just another trend, it is a new way of building products and scaling our practice. This is confirmed by research that we've done. So after going through that, we were completely sold on the concept of solving our problems with the design process and the lack of consistency in some places in our interface with a design system. But then we ask ourselves a question what is a design system? How can we define it and how we can build it for us? And as with everything in our industry, there's, of course, a bunch of different definitions. One of my favorites comes from Nathan Curtis, who is perhaps the best expert in the field of design systems and fighting inconsistency in user interface in the world. And Nathan Curtis actually is preaching design systems and modular design and development for years now. He published a great book, Modular Web Design, back in, I believe, 2009. And the basic tenets of building your design systems were actually encapsulated in this book so many years ago. Somehow, it didn't catch up back then, but we'll talk about the reasons why design systems are getting so much momentum today in a little bit. So Nathan said that design system is a framework for decision-making and team behaviors. And he famously also said that design system is a product serving products, and as such, it should be built as a product in an agile process. So basically, Nathan Curtis is saying design system is a process. Do not expect a fixed thing in time that is done at any given point in time. It's not fixed. It's going to grow over time. It's a process that we have to apply to our practice to keep building the design system and manage this growing inconsistency. Because the entropy is always increasing, we have to continue to fight it to manage this problem. Another way to define a design system is from the architectural point of view. And this is my definition that I'm using to explain design systems to our customers and to our teammates as well, so they can grasp what we are really working on. And I'm saying that design system is really a core of the architecture of a product. It goes throughout all the implementations, all the changes, incremental changes in the product, and it's an architectural core that really ensures design and code consistency and provides the product development efficiency that we mentioned right at the beginning. So design system is really a mean to have a proper, very good design process. So that's my definition. But here's the thing. You could say that design system is a process. You could say design system is this meta architecture. But at the end of the day, design system is really what it contains and what it does. So pragmatic definition of a design system, something tangible, something that we can apply to our work without having a very big philosophical discussion about the nature of the design system, is just really defining what it consists and what it does. So with that thought, and with the need to become more practical about the definition of a design system, we went back to research for the third time. Like before we move with everything, we just continue to do research constantly. So this time, we've analyzed all the publicly available design system that we could have found at that time, right? And we listed over 30 of them. And we started to just check what this design system consists of, and we started to try to like establish this kind of chart and see like what are the patterns in a design system. That might be a little bit of a confusing statement, but what we really meant by that is what are the things that are present in every design system? What are the things that are present in most of the design systems? So basically, it's a question of what design systems teams, or just teams responsible for building design systems, consider valuable to put into their systems. And as you can see, I mean, like, and that's beautiful. Design systems are very consistent, right? So our weapon to fight inconsistency in the design process is really consistent. So that's awesome. So most of the design systems consist of UI patterns. That's pretty obvious. But these UI patterns are typically going arm in arm with implementation guidelines, do's and don'ts, development documentation, which can consist of reference to particular components in code, can reference classes used for styling, it can describe all the variants of particular component, anything that's really necessary for developer to do her job. And then, like color palettes, icon families, typographic scales are typically seen in all design systems. Space definitions, so grid and layouts, are also very popular. And some stuff that is not that popular, sadly, it's the set of design principles, which I'm a big fan of. But like most of the teams do not see value in putting design principles in a design system. That's the current state of affairs. It might change. Hopefully, it will evolve. But this is where companies are today. After checking this data, we just felt like we have to organize it, right? We have to make sense of it and put it into our own world and define it in a way that's practical for us. So after like playing with all these numbers, we found 3 categories that will describe what design system consists of. So first of all, something that we are calling building blocks, but some companies call it a design language, right? So to clean up this our vocabulary mess in the design world, design language is really all about the basic building blocks that go across all of the UI patterns in a given system, right? So in our world, just to avoid the mess with design language as a term, we're calling them building blocks. And colors, of course, are present in everything we do in design. Typography is present in most of the patterns that we are designing, right? If not all of them. Space as well. Then icons and assets are pretty popular, of course, right? We keep using them all the time. On the next level, we have things that are built from building blocks, right? So UI patterns. And let's stop here for a second. So UI patterns can be organized in multiple ways. I mean, like, it's really up to the comfort of the team working on the patterns library. So a popular and a very good approach is atomic design, right? A methodology built by Brad Frost. He's an amazing expert in the world of design systems. So that's another name that you probably should remember: Nathan Curtis and Brad Frost, right? So we have 2 names to take a note on and just follow these guys in whatever they do. So Brad Frost said that a metaphor that can be used to organize design patterns should come from the world of biology, right? So we have atoms, we have molecules, we have organisms, and then he ran out of terms, so he used templates at the final level. And like some teams are very comfortable with that, some are not that comfortable, right? And we didn't feel super comfortable with this methodology, but we like the all the levels that Brad described, but we don't really feel comfortable with the terminology coming from biology. It just introduces a little bit too much of a friction for our entire team. So instead of saying atoms, we call the smallest patterns elements. Instead of calling instead of calling items that consist of elements molecules, we call them components, and then modules, and at the very top we have templates. So similar architecture, but different vocabulary, something that we found just much easier to communicate to our team. And then finally, on the ground level, we have rules, and rules are implementation guidelines, right? You could see in our research that they're very popular. Editorial guidelines, right? Like they're also, you can see them in design systems, and they're very, very valuable. MailChimp famously built a great set of editorial guidelines defining their language that they use in communication to their customers, and that's part of their design systems. And then design principles, which I'm pushing for, but plenty of companies do not use them at all in their design systems. So this structure, this fundamental structure of a design system, really helped us think about the task of building a design system and making it part of our overall design process. So here's the thing, you could say patterns, style guides, like we've heard about all of that multiple times in the past. And if this is what you have in mind, you're absolutely right. This is, it keeps coming up every couple seasons in the design world, right? And I draw a little bit of a chart just to walk you through the history of the entire thing. And to show you how many times we actually tried to create this modular environment for design and development. So about 8-10 years ago, plenty of design conferences will talk about Christopher Alexander, and rightfully so. His work in architecture is absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend reading his books from the 70s and 80s, especially Pattern Language and The Timeless Way of Building. And Christopher Alexander created a pattern language, so truly a design system, if you just look closely into it, for architecture. And he promoted this approach, and then it got picked up by the world of digital products, right? And inspired, first of all, developers to push towards objective-oriented software and object-oriented programming. And there was this famous book, seminal book, Design Patterns, which is usually referred to as the book of Gang of Four in 1994. And similar problems were risen back then by developers that we are discussing right now in the design world. And they came back again in 2006 when Yahoo made an open source user interface library, which became very popular. And then again with Bootstrap, that plenty of companies applies to really complicated use cases, and it served as the general framework for front-end development. And we discussed reusability of assets and documenting everything in the system. And then just a couple of years ago, two things happened. First of all, Salesforce invested quite a lot of money into building Lightning, and they built their design operations team. And Airbnb announced that they have design operations team as well, and then plenty of companies followed. And another important thing in the web development world is that JavaScript modules came into the game and let us really divide JavaScript into encapsulated components. So, like every couple of years, we are discussing the same problems of consistency of experience and consistency of code. And it seems like we are constantly trying to build this coherent system that would connect design and development. But every couple of years, we are missing each other. Developers and designers were missing each other. But this time, I would argue this is completely different. So why today? So first of all, digital matters more than at any time in the past. 6 out of top 10 companies in the world are tech companies, and if you think of it, they either make majority of their revenue through digital products, or at least a significant part of their revenue through digital products. And that's a completely new situation, right? What it means is that this is a source of inspiration to plenty of entrepreneurs all over the world and investors and they continue to push more and more time and capital into the digital space, creating more competitive environment. With the competitiveness of the growing competitiveness of the environment, the experience matters more and more. Why? Because if there's more companies in any given space, the cost of development goes down, as we know now for years. The thing that companies can use and should use to compete on the market is user experience, right? And we can clearly see that all of the companies in the list of top 10 definitely invest quite a lot into design, right? Because they know that the way to actually thrive on the market today, on this highly competitive market, is really to just double down on user experience. So we have growth of the importance of digital products, we have growth of the importance of experience, but then finally, technology is ready. So business is ready, technology is ready, and the question is design ready, right? And this is up to us, up to all the designers in the industry to actually this time being ready, because this is a very fertile ground that we are working on, and we can truly build this modular design and development environment and just create better experiences in a shorter time. So that's the opportunity. Okay, so after this whole research that we've discussed, let's talk about how to actually build a design system, right? So hopefully at this point in this presentation, you guys know exactly why building a design system matters, and it matters because it allows us to scale design and development in growing organizations. And you know what is a design system in all these in all these big companies, right? So we got a sense of how our design system should look like. Now, how to build a design system and how this task is different than building a pattern library or a style guide as we used to do in the past. And it is completely different. So the first thing that we have to do is really accept that this task will never be done, because building a design process, a design system, is an ongoing process, just as Nathan Curtis mentioned it in his definition of a design system. So to really be successful at building a design system, we have to make it part of our product development process, and we have to start building it now. Because if you think about design system as a product serving products, and you apply agile development principles to the process of building a design system, all of a sudden what you have is an iterative approach to developing consistency in the user interface, which means that you can build small things and deliver them fast. Start with defining color palette, do it and deliver it fast. We're going to discuss this as well. And at the end of every sprint, you should have something that slightly, if that's all that's possible, but like slightly is good enough, increases the consistency of the user experience. If you accept this processual nature of a design system, the next thing is that you have to build a team that can run this process. And that's somehow challenging because the process is completely new, right? It's brand fresh. So you have to sell it to your organization to get time of necessary people, right? Of people who can actually help you build a design system. Naturally, this is not a challenge that we had, right? Because the love for design system and hatred towards inconsistency in the user interface came right from the top, right? So that secured our founding. But to be honest, like it's not that we didn't have to sell the concept of building a design system at UXPin to anybody. In our case, we didn't have to sell it to stakeholders, right? Because we just love the idea, but we still had to, and we continue to do so. We have to sell it to our teams, right? So we have to encourage them to use things that we are defining in the design system. So it's somehow a similar issue. But the most important thing is that to build a design operations team, right? A team that's going to take care, among different things, is going to take care of building a design system. The most important thing is to make it multidisciplinary. So design operations, design system, like this design part of this terms keeps coming up. Here's the thing: it's a little bit of a misconception. Design operations teams do not consist only of designers. They cannot, right? Because design system is a multidisciplinary effort. It requires changes on the design end and on the code end. So you have to cover these two aspects. How did it start at UXPIN? Well, it actually started with just me, right? For a brief period of time, I was design operations team of one. And because I had to prove that this is something that is worth time of our engineers and our designers. And I had to encourage them to contribute and think about consistency every single day. So to do so, I had to deliver something tangible that they can go through. And that was the user interface inventory, which might right now sounds like a mystery, but we are going to solve this mystery in a couple of minutes. So once you get any kind of multidisciplinary team, can be a team of one, can be just you if you can design and code, then you have to think about, okay, what this design operations team, even if this is a team of one, should actually cover, right? And naturally, you know, like we all love nice acronyms in user experience design world, you know, IXD, AI, UX. So here's another one, FAM, TAM. That really describes what design operations team should be taken care of. So first of all, foundation of experience consistency. So that's all about building and promoting design system. And the emphasis should be on promoting, right? Because a design system that is not being used in a company is just a zombie design system and really should just die, right? Because it doesn't really increase consistency of code and experience. So what does it do? Nothing, right? So promotion of a design system in a company is really, really important part of all the duties of design operations team. Second of all, acceleration of design process efficiency, which means that you might be forced to build certain tools that are necessary for your designers to be successful. An example of this tool is something that I'm working on whenever I have time, so mostly at nights and on the weekends, which is a color tool. And what does it mean, a color tool? Well, basically, on the code end, when we defined our color palette, we used functions from less CSS preprocessor, and these functions, like lighten or darken, which basically take any definition of a color and make the color darker or lighter. They're really useful on the code end, but they're not easy for designers to work with. Why? Because Photoshop and Sketch do not follow the same way of calculating brightness of a color and darkness of a color as LESS and SAS preprocessors do. LESS and SAS use HSL. Photoshop, I believe, use HSV. Sketch, I'm not sure. I think HSV as well, which will return completely different hex, right? So I started to build a little tool that will just let designers get this final hex values by using the same functions that are used by LESS and SAS, right? So this is just an example of a tool that you have to build, right, in order to increase efficiency of your design process and your design team, right? Because that's the main task, right? You want them to be super efficient and build consistent experiences. And then finally, you have to manage experience consistency. And building a design system, promoting it, building tools for designers and developers, like that's all fun. The biggest problem is, how do you manage this consistency over time? How do you make sure that new patterns coming to the system are actually built from building blocks from the design language that you define in the system? That's a constant challenge, and there is no easy way to do it. It's all based on conversations and setting rules and talking to people and encouraging them to always use design system, right? But this is really this is what we do every day at our design operations team. This is, as far as I know, what the other design operations teams do every day, and this is the bread and butter of design operations. So FAM, foundation, acceleration, and management. Okay. So after you have, you understand that building a design process is a never-ending process. And after you have your multidisciplinary team, even if this is a team of one, you have your design operations team established. The next step is actually listing everything that you have across all of your products, right? Across all of the interfaces that were designed and are on production servers today, right? So how to do it? It's all about building an inventory, of course, right? And there are basically two approaches of building inventory. There's a fast approach, which basically tells you to take screenshots of everything that you have, of pieces of the interface, and then finding categories for them, right? So let's say that you can take screenshots of all the buttons in the system, right? And you will have a category of an element or an atom called buttons, right? And then forms, and you have component called form, and form fields go separately into elements, and so on and so on, right? So you just take screenshots of everything in your interface and then just add it to an inventory. Could be a PowerPoint presentation, could be a UX pin project, whatever it is, right? That's the first approach. The second approach, which I'm more fond of, is all based on collecting all these patterns, these micro elements, whatever it is, right? All the pieces of the interface straight from projects, from design projects, right? So you go into your UXPin projects and take all the buttons and copy them to another project in UXPin, or take all your sketch files, right? And find all the buttons, all the form fields, all the containers, right? And then copy them to another sketch project. And the same goes with Photoshop. And then unify them, right? So we just probably redraw them on one platform. Why? Because then at the end of this process, you will have something actionable, right? There's not a lot that you can do with screenshots, right? It's just tells you what you have, but it doesn't let you take the next step and use it to actually organize this inventory into a design system. So naturally, we started with just collecting all these assets, but here's an important thing. You have to fit it into something, if you can, something that exists. So you might be surprised if you're a designer, but there might be a scaffolding of a design system already in existence on the code end. And this is exactly what happened in our case, and I've heard from many companies that this is something that happens. Because modular front-end architecture is popular since probably 2006 with the emergence of SAS as a CSS preprocessor, and definitely became more popular over the past couple of years. So in many cases, you would see a similar architecture of your CSS to this, right? Which, as you can see, we have here elements, we have here components, right? It's all divided. So when you're building your inventory, you probably want to check with one of your front-end developers to check if there's any kind of architecture that you can match on the front-end edge. So it means that, okay, I mean, like, we can see that we have buttons, we have little clouds, so tooltips, we have bullet lists, right? So that's something that tells us, okay, whenever I'm finding these items, this is how they should be called, right? So this is a list of elements because this is how it's represented in code. And I actually like to treat code as the source of truth when building a design system. So match the existing architecture if you can, and if it makes sense, of course. Okay, so I'm talking a lot, but let me show you something. Do you guys want to see a real interface inventory? I can't really see your faces, unfortunately, so I'm hoping that you're noting your places, because I have a real interface inventory right here for you. Okay. So hopefully this is what you want to see. So this is our inventory that we used to kick off the process of building our design system. So as you can see, we have all the colors here, all the colors from your UXPin interface. And as you can see also, they have matching variables from less files, right? So every piece of this inventory was meant to be immediately actionable, right? So the way I build this inventory of colors, I just went through all the less files in our code repository, and I was looking for all the color variables defined in the system. Unfortunately, I found 116 of them, and that's a different story, right? But that was the first thing I shared with our team, all of our developers and designers, to let them know in a completely non-aggressive way that this is what I found, right? And do we really need that? Is that an accident? Is the fact that we have so many similar shades of blue, is that something that we need, or something that we don't really need and somebody just made a mistake, right? Because my intuition told me that, like 116 color definitions, probably not what we wanted to have. This is something that was just growing. That was this growing entropy of an enclosed system. So similarly, like I went through all the pieces of our interface, and I listed all the different text styles, right, that we have in different parts of UXPin. And then I started to collect patterns straight out of our projects, right? So we have navigation patterns, for example, here. As you can see, I'm calling them modules because this is how they're represented in code. And here are elements also represented in code. Now, another useful tactic when you're making inventory is keeping a journal on the side. So I used UX documentation feature, and as you can see, I listed some of the reference to code. So in our conversations with developers, it's just easier to find this particular element because I listed the file where I found it in the first place, right? I listed some variants as well. So like it's nothing really sophisticated. It's just a list of things that I felt like we can either improve or we have to talk about them. And I think a good case of the journal was with our color palette. So let's see here. Right, so you can see that I listed some features ideas for us, but also I just listed details of these lessons from documenting colors, right? And that's the journal. So then our team can really know what I was thinking about when I created this inventory. So it's just like enters to my mind on the time of building the inventory. So that's the whole idea, right? So it's all about just documenting every aspect of your interface. This is a good example, right? So you can see how many different buttons do we have in UX Pin. Like some of them are completely fine, and of course they should stay with us, and they are very functional and useful to our users. But then, like for some, we can have questions. Do we need this kind of button in our system, or can we actually live without it and increase consistency of the overall system? Which is a typical question. So in inventory, first of all, is a point of reference. Second of all, if you are collecting items, not taking screenshots, then it's beginning of your design system because you have actionable items that you can continue to reuse everywhere you go with your system. And it's definitely a proof that the design system is necessary, right? So when you're thinking about selling a concept of building a design system to your organizations, start with design inventory, with interface inventory. Why? Because then you can show this inconsistency. You can, for example, show all these 116 colors and ask the question, like, do we need that? Is that slowing us down? Is that slowing us our development, right? Is that confusing to our users, right? So inventory is a great way of actually proving that you need a design system. Okay, so that's the inventory. Here's another thing. After you have inventory, hopefully after showing the inventory, you'll actually have a full support of your organization. This is exactly what happened in our case. After building the inventory, 3 of my colleagues at UXPin just said that they can work after hours, whatever. They want to be part of this project because they definitely feel the pain and they want to help improving it, right? On the code end and on the design end. And we started to work together step by step in weekly sprints and just delivering after every sprint a piece of the design system that's already increasing the consistency, right? The first sprint that we started, or a series of sprints in fact, was all about building the building blocks, right? Building our design language. And design language, as you might remember, consists of many different things, colors, typography, iconography, all these pervasive tiny elements of everything that we do in the design world, right? So with that in mind, our first sprint was all about colors. So again, we went through this palette of 116 colors, and we started to check how often do they actually appear in the code. Why? Because we wanted to track all these mistakes. And what do I mean really by mistakes in color palettes in their usage, right? So it's really very simple. Designers and developers, we are constantly eyeballing things, right? We are seeing one shade of gray and we are just kind of like guessing and finding something that we feel is close. Might not be the exact shade of gray. And what does it end up with? End up at is a new variable defined in code. Because if designer was trying to eyeball a shade of color from a past design and accidentally created a new shade of gray, developer is going to look into that and decide like, okay, I don't see a variable for this shade of gray, it's a new shade of gray, and it's going to be defined in the system. And this is this is exactly how the inconsistency grows in any enclosed system, right? There's always a decision there's usually a mistake and then a decision at the very beginning of this trouble. So by actually going again through this list of colors and checking how often do they appear in code, we wanted to find these mistakes, because if a given shade of gray appears once or twice in the system and another one is represented in 12 different places, we know which one is the incorrect one, right? So that was our task. After going through that, a couple of things happened. So first of all, we started to list possible new colors in a Google spreadsheet, right? And we started to match colors existing in the system to these colors, right? We found that, like there are some like multiple color variables which are really referring to one hex color, right? So we wanted to match them and replace them with one variable. The whole task of actually building color palette was I mean, like really detail oriented, of course, but also, I mean, like kind of tedious, a lot of fun, but really tedious. But immediately when we started to list all these colors coming from our system and all the new colors which were like represented by the true colors that designers had in mind when they design system, we started to just hit the wall or hit the ceiling really of naming of colors, and that's a real challenge. Naming in a design system is extremely hard. So plenty of you probably are UX users, so you know that our interface is mostly monochromatic, right? We are using white and shades of gray. And why we are doing that, of course, to put your designs in the central point. We don't want to distract you with colors in our interface. We want our interface to be intuitive but invisible. So we need a lot of shades of gray. But how do you name them? Do you name them medium gray, more medium gray, or darker gray, dark gray? It's getting confusing quickly. And the way to address it, there are different ways to address it. Some companies are using the true names of colors. This shade of blue, if I remember correctly, is formally called blue ribbon. And you can find them on. I think Wikipedia actually lists of the all of the names of colors, official names. But there's also a nifty API that lets you check the true name of color, and some companies do that. After checking our colors that we had in the system, we just felt like, okay, this is not intuitive enough. Nobody's going to understand it. Another way, I think in IBM Carbon, colors are referred to by numbers. So there will be a color 1, color 2, color 3, right? Which is another way, so completely abstract way of naming colors. Also didn't work for us because we have so many shades of gray that we need in the system, in the interface, and we couldn't really use such an abstract name. So we had to figure out our own method. And what we did is really, first of all, defining the most popular colors in UX interface and calling them base, right? With a reference to the color that they represent and base. So blue base, red base, gray base, this is how we build our colors. But then, so this is a primary color palette. But then we needed also secondary, so accent colors. And we decided to derive all these colors in a systematic way using less functions, right? Lighten and darken. And because these colors are secondary and accent colors are gradually becoming lighter and darker, we decided to actually use the function name in the color name. And use the percentage by which the color is becoming lighter and darker in the name as well, right? So a blue 15% lighter than our base blue is this hex color, and this is how the variable in code is going to be represented, right? By blue lighten 15. A color lighter by 30% is going to be called blue lighten 30. And the whole hope, and it's already actually working quite well for us, the whole hope was that this is going to ease the tension between designers and developers talking about colors. Instead of coming up with new hex colors or new RGBA colors to be added to code in just the Q&A process, we wanted to give designers and developers a tool to communicate in a very clear manner, right? So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to put 666 gray color here, they can just say like, okay, make this gray 5% lighter, right? Which is more, it's easier to understand and easier to communicate. And this is the final version of our palette. We went through a lot of fights to actually make it happen, but finally, this is what we came up with. And like one thing that I have to really emphasize here, and that was a revelation for our back then brand new design operations team, is that the design operations team truly serves designers and developers at the company, so serves product team. And as such, we have to comply to their requirements, but then we have to guard consistency in the system. Something that happened to us, like the first version of this palette was rejected by our design team. The biggest change was that we had one gray base, which was actually represented by hash 666. Because that was the color that was quite frequently used in our interface, so we believe that this is the main gray color for us. And then we derived the rest of the colors from this gray, which was fairly easy because that's like a mid-range gray color, and like it's not too dark, not too light. So it was very easy for us to define the rest of the shades of gray, starting with this color. But what happened is our designers said that they don't want to use it as the base color because it's too light, and they're planning to replace it in the interface anyway whenever they can. And at first we felt, like that's it's really bad. Like what can we do with that? And we felt frankly kind of offended because we've done all this research and all this job defining the color palette. But after thinking about it, we just decided, like, wait a second, like if we'll define a shade of gray that as the base color, as the primary color that they don't want to use, that's just like waste of time. Why would we have this color palette if nobody's going to use it? So we went back to our designers and asked them, like, okay, what are the shades of gray that you want to use? And they told us that for them, the base is that there's a dark gray, 444, and there's a light gray, F3, 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 and the rest should be derived from that. So we went back to our Google spreadsheet and we started to match colors to derivative of these two colors, and we figured it out, and now our designers want to use these palettes, right? Because this is something that they feel really serves their purpose. So that was a color palette, right? And the next sprint, we took over basic properties, and just really quick, without going into too many technical details, you really want to have definitions of all the basic visual properties, all these tiny properties in your design system as part of your overall language, right? So borders, border radius, box shadows, right? Space definitions on the microsite, so padding on a container, right? So this is something that you want to have defined in your design system because it's going to be used across all the patterns. A very advanced yet good way to define all these micro properties is with something called design tokens. Design tokens are really like style properties represented in a serialized data format, are they either JSON or YAML. And then this serialized data is used to build style definition in whatever format is required, right? If a team is using SAS as a CSS preprocessor, these properties are going to be used to build SAS variables, right? If a team is keeping styling in their JavaScript files, which is becoming very popular, this is going to build JavaScript variables and objects to be used in code. If, for example, a team is working on an Android app and wants to keep the color palette, as they should, consistent, there's a Salesforce tool to consume design tokens, and it will automatically change all the color definitions to the Android format, right? So that's one way of doing that. Now, to really use design tokens, you have to have a build process. I don't want to go into too many details, but the build process needs to be ready for consumption of design tokens, right? And this is where we stopped because our build process is kind of complex, and we didn't want to mess with it, and we definitely didn't want to make our developers angry. Since we just started building our design systems, we didn't want to be too annoying. So we decided to just move forward without design tokens at first, and we will add them later. So if you are in a similar situation, what is the other way to document all these micro style properties, all these basic properties? Another way is just to really documenting them, right? Documenting them in a visual way, so something that's very easy to be consumed by designers, right? So like base border is 1 pixel, and this is the shade of gray used, and this is an example where this border is being used. So it's an information for designers. If you have a container, this is how the border should look like, right? And then So this is the designer-friendly definition. But then you have a less variable. This is actually less mixin. There's a mistake here. Less mixin used to generate this border. This is information for the front-end developer, right? So you're just supposed to list all these properties, and there's usually not too many of them, in a place that's really accessible to the team, right? So in your shared space. So if you're a UXPin user, I would argue that you want to keep this documentation in UXPin, one project folder called design system. This is how we do it. So all the people know where this documentation resides. So that's our approach. Like it's not as advanced as design tokens, not as universal, not as fast, unfortunately, but it's easier to implement, right? So that's the core value. Okay, and subsequently, like we moved to typography and icons, and we started to build patterns. But I will just extend this whole presentation to hours, right? We can do it. I mean, like if you guys have time, but I suppose you want to get back to work or to your lives, right? So I will just jump in the process right to building rules, because that's another thing. When you have your building blocks defined, you want to make sure that all the rules are in place to help your product teams use basic properties, right? Use all the pieces of all the building blocks and all the pieces of the design language to build their own consistent patterns. And this is a very important concept in building a design system. At the end of every sprint, first of all, consistency of experience should gradually grow, right? So if you have a color palette, implement it, right? Like immediately, give it to your developers and designers so they can use it, because that's at the very worst, it's stopping the growth of the inconsistency of colors, hopefully. So you gradually deliver everything. But once you are thinking about refactoring some components and just documenting some patterns in your design system, then you want your product design team to be fully on board and ready to contribute new patterns. And for them to contribute new patterns, it's not only enough to use the right design language. They also have to comply with certain rules that you should define in the system. And here's where design principles can be really helpful, right? Because that's an abstraction of all the rules that are supposed to be used across all the pieces of the interface built at your company, right? So if you give design principles and all the building blocks to your team, to your designers and developers, I bet you the stuff that they're going to come up with as patterns to be added to the design system is going to be way more coherent with what already exists, and is going to be more consistent with your expectations, right? We have a set of design principles that was built for the UXPin redesign over a year ago, actually almost like 2 years ago. We built this set of design principles, so we just applied it or reapplied it as part of our design system. Okay, so we have building blocks. Let's imagine that we have all the building blocks, we have all the roles defined in the system. It's time to start working on patterns. It starts to refactor some code and increase consistency of what we have. To do so, you have to accept that in a design system, design and code go arm in arm. This is the place where design and code converges as a process. Like it doesn't mean that they are the same, but definitely as part of the process, design system is the place where these two converge. A story that I'm going to share on Medium a couple of hours is going to be all about icons and managing icons in the design system. And that's an example in which code editor becomes one of your tools in a design operations team, because you have to define the components. You have to think through how to manage icons. What is the most optimal way of managing icons in your design system, and how this way of managing icons is going to connect your designers and developers. And there's no way to do it without understanding how these icons are going to work on the code end. So I encourage you to read this story, probably published in like an hour or so. It's going to be very detailed. But here's another thing. Designers on a design operations team, I would argue, we have to be quite technical. Because another thing is, like, we are optimizing the experience, so we have to also think about performance, right? So for our work at UXPin on icons in the design system, we've done all these tests, right, of different methods that we could technically use to manage our icons. And to do so, to understand this data, to understand the differences between methods, designers have to be a little bit more technical than average, right? They don't have to be great developers, but they have to understand what's going on the code end. Because, for example, like if Wood decides to use PNG sprite is probably not the best idea, but SVG sprite is a decent method of managing icons in a design system. I could see that being something that can work. Our designers have to maintain a library of SVG icons, probably done in the very same way, so they can follow a common format, so we can add it to our build process, so we can generate sprites automatically from set of SVGs stored in a probably Git repository, right? And like to really take care of this part on the individual designer level, you have to understand what's going on there, right? And how to actually build a sprite, right, automatically using Webpack or using Gulp, right? Different methods. So we have to accept that to build a design system, designers and developers have to work arm in arm, and it really requires for developers to understand or try to understand design, and for designers to understand or try to understand code, right? So this is an important part of the practice of building a design system. Okay, once we have this understanding, you're all fully equipped to actually build your patterns, right? And that's the part of the task that will never end: building the patterns and implementing them and promoting them across designers and developers, and making sure that they're being used and measuring the usage, right? So that's the never-ending story. But an important point here is that you gotta start small. Like, don't try to redesign everything. Don't try to define every single pattern used in your interface. Just go like piece by piece. If you can fix your buttons or one kind of a button in the system, the consistency is increasing, right? So gradually you're doing a very good job. So start with whatever you can, right? We actually started with buttons. And like, no matter what you do, of course, keep the architecture consistent. If right at the beginning you agree to build your elements, component, modules, and templates, keep doing it, right? Keep naming them consistently, and also take care. If you're working on the code end, take care of actually representing this all assets in code, right? So if you're working, for example, React.js, make sure that the lowest level in building this part of this module is going to be this tiny element, right? It should be a separate JavaScript component that you are going to implement in multiple places, and should be fully encapsulated, right? So you can keep using that component in many different places. Today we are using this particular element just in our spec mode, UXPin spec mode, right? So the automatically generated style and code properties for all the designs coming from UXPin or Sketch. But we might need this component in different places. So it should be ready for that, right? So no matter what's going to happen in the future, designers and developers should have access to this tiny element, and it should be possible to use it anywhere, right? Okay, so keep the architecture consistent. And document it, right? I mean, like, design system is not just a pattern library, as we discussed many times throughout the talk. And even within the pattern library in a design system, it's not enough just to have assets. You have to have documentation, because the whole purpose is to make this UI patterns understandable to designers and developers, and useful to designers and developers. As you might remember, I mentioned that one of the key tasks of a design operations team is actually encouraging people to implement these patterns. If you won't have any documentation and people won't know how to use them or when to use them, these particular patterns, they're not going to use them, right? So you lost, right? You wasted time. So it's important to actually document patterns that are part of the design system. All right, we are getting towards the end. But here's another question that I'm not going to hear the answer to, but do you want to see what we have in terms of functionality in action? I would assume that you do want to see that, just for the sake of the rest of the presentation. So, something that's really important to us at UXPin is to make a design system fully actionable, right? So just recently, and we continue to work on that, we started something called Design System Library, right, in UXPin. And this is how actually we are implementing a design system in UXPin, right? So our designers have access to this design system library, and they can just use it on every single project. And the first thing that we have defined here is the color palette, right? With all the names that we are using, right? So developers can see that as well. And the way it works, like let's just select something on the screen like this header, and let's say that we are changing this color to gray base, and it's going to change, right? And why this is important? Like it's important to have these colors defined because it means that on the next project our designers are going to work on, they don't have to figure out shades of gray, right? Because they have all the shades of gray they need defined in the system. It also means that once developers are going to get a new project, they can refer to these shades of gray defined in the library, and they can match them. They can see what kind of variable is being used for this particular color, right? So they can see, okay, I have this color. This is gray base. This is the less variable used in our code base. So they know how to use this color. They don't have to remember that it's 44444, right? Another thing, of course, are our text styles. So this is our typographic scale, right? So you can see that there's an typeface defined, of course, but also font size and line height. And this is also just quickly applicable, right? If this is not a header anymore and we want to just use text-based, I can just click on that and it's going to change, right? Also, we have our icons defined. So SVG files that I mentioned, like in measuring the performance, like we have our icons library. So instead of constantly looking for assets, our designers have access to all the icons that they need, right? And they can just style them right on their project. And finally, we have our patterns, right? And this is probably the most exciting parts. So just recently at UXPin, we actually, first of all, drastically, we've improved our symbols. And probably, without, I don't think that's I'm not overstating anything. I think we have the most advanced and most useful symbols across all the design tools out there. And symbols are stored in this design system library for a very simple reason. So first of all, they can be kept in sync with the library, right? So let's say that I'm going to change what I'm going to change. Let's just zoom in a little bit so it's going to be easier for me. Okay, let's change this color to a color from, this is another way to access colors from a design system. Let's change it to this mint. Don't do it. It's extremely unreadable. It's not legible. It's against all the accessibility purposes, but let's say that I'm a crazy designer. I just did it. And then I'm thinking, like, okay, this is going to land in our library, right? So I just sync this goes button to the library. So now every single instance of this symbol is going to have this color, right? So, okay, I'm probably messing with our designs right now. So let's just revert it back, right? And we can sync it right to the library again. But then if I'm changing something, let's say that, okay, changing again to some different color. Let's use this green. It's a little bit better. Still pretty ugly, but a little bit better. And I'm working on my design, and I feel like, this is not the pattern that this is not how it should look like, because this is not how it's defined in the design system. I can just update it to the version saved in the design system, right? And this screenshot is going to update in a second. And I can also detach symbols. So you can overwrite all the properties. You can keep your assets synced with the design systems library, just as defined by your design operations team, hopefully. If you need to detach, if you need to create a new symbol, you have an option to do so as well. And you can overwrite all the visual properties and content, right? So you can change text and whatnot. You can also nest symbols, which is very important for like navigation and advanced patterns. So that's on the symbols end, but that's not even close to an end. That's even not close to the full value. And this is part that we are still working on, and there will be more information about it on the market quite soon. But for now, let me show you a little bit of like a beta of this whole experience. So this particular symbol is saved with a documentation. right? So there's documentation that, as you can see, defines our mixin used in code. It defines how to use this mixin, what to include, right? There's some guidelines. There are some guidelines here for implementation as well. So documentation from a design system is saved in a symbol. And what it really comes down to is that whenever I'll just drop a bunch of symbols, it doesn't make any sense from the design perspective, but let me just, for the sake of an example, drop a couple of them here. Every instance of this button is going to appear, let's load the preview, with this attached documentation in place. So just give me a second. We'll have a little bit of a chaotic design, so forgive me, it's nothing really meaningful. We have our buttons, icon font is loading, right? And now let's check the spec mode and click on this particular button. So we know it's a ghost button, and the specification is ready for our developers, right? So the documentation really happens automatically, right? And it's not as limited as just like the definition of style properties, like what we have here. This is the actual documentation that developers need in order to use this pattern in code, right? And every instance of this symbol will have this documentation attached, right, and kept in sync, which basically removes all the task of building a documentation for us, for designers, and it makes every single design development ready, right? Developers can access all this information. They don't have to go to any external documentation. This whole information is always in context of a particular project that they're working on. So this is what we have right now. Quite soon we are going to announce an early access program, and it will be possible to test all these features and more, because there's more coming up. If you are thinking, about Sketch right now, which I'm sure some of you are thinking about Sketch, it's all natural. These features are also going to be available for Sketch. This is something that we are working on. Don't tell anybody; it's a secret. I mean, it's still a little bit of time before the release, but it's all coming up. So this is where we are with our design system. So not only at UX, but we are building a real design system for us, for our development practice, right? To just make it super fast and really consistent across all the instances of our product. So the experience is going to be much more consistent. It already is, right? We are also building features to help you, all of you, build your design systems. And let me leave you with a thought from my favorite Christopher Alexander, so the architect responsible for pattern language and architecture. The whole end game of building a design system is to actually make it part of the collective memory. And I'm thinking about it constantly, because this is a very tempting vision of fully democratized design and development. And I fully expect companies to continue to invest in design systems. And I'm pretty sure soon building and contributing to a design system is going to be part of every professional designer and developer job. It's going to be something that we're going to do every day. And hopefully at one point in time, companies are going to share their design systems, and they will become part of the collective memory. And that's going to be a path to a fully democratized design in which building great experiences for users is really easy. So I'm really looking forward to this future. And with that, we need to finish this conversation so you guys can ask me some questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Martin. That was fantastic. We will try to get through a couple questions here. I know we're a little bit over time. So we'll also run a quick poll here as we're getting through some of the questions here. We've got some fantastic questions. The first thing that I will mention is if you have more than 3 years of experience in a product team, you can go ahead and apply for Product Tribes, which is our online Slack community of over 3,300 designers, developers, and product managers. Let's get into the questions here. So first question is, when should a design team start worrying about building a design system?
Yesterday. It's a very good question. There are two ways a design team can approach it. There's a more liberal way in which you could say, like we have a brand new product, so it's fully consistent, like internally, because we just build it. So there's nothing that really makes it inconsistent right now. And like we can just relax and continue the work until the inconsistency appears in our product. This is how we did it by accident, as you explained, right? We didn't build the design system 4 years ago, right? We just let the inconsistency grow, and then it hit us. So this is a big problem for us and a big cost because it's it's not perfect experience for our users. It's also pretty difficult for our developers, right, and for designers. So then you could say like, okay, once you have the inconsistency, that's the right time to build a design system. But I would argue that there's a different way to deal with that, which is building design system right from the beginning for any project that you're working on. Just build design system on the side, and even if you're starting with a completely new product, right? And first of all, this is going to prevent the growth of inconsistency in your interface. So you're going to save time and money to your company or to your employer, right? And then you're going to build the right culture on your hopefully growing product design team from day one. So this is something like I'm still working on this concept, because what does it mean building a design system for a new product right from the scratch? But in a way, you can think about it as a different method, and we can call it design system first. I'm working on a project in which this is something that I actually applied, and the way it currently works is just after defining the first screen, I started to divide the whole screen into components, right? And the whole experience is just represented by sketches and rough wireframes. But the first high fidelity screen was divided into components, which are also represented in code. And the rest of the product was matched to these components, right? So I'm kind of like building my own Lego set to extend my product. So that's the second approach. So it's either you build your design system when your experience already sucks, right? Both for users and designers and developers, or you just do it right now, starts today, and just keep growing the design system. So the inconsistency will never happen.
Right. And a couple people are also curious, what is the difference between a style guide / pattern library and a design system?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I should probably write something about it, I guess. So style guide, that was my first task many years ago that was trusted with to increase consistency on the interface and on the code end. I was trusted with building a style guide. Now, here's the problem. Style guide is a repository of all the accepted styles in a given product, which by definition means that this is a thing fixed in time, right? So a typical process of building style guide used to be that somebody would just sit down and list everything in the interface and then try to enforce it. And style guides, typically were limited to definitions of a design language, and quite often also style guide was extended to best code practices, especially for pure front-end development, HTML, CSS. That was my experience in the past. Now, the problem with style guides was that not only was not fully actionable because it was just scratching the surface, but also at the very moment you finish your first iteration of a style guide, most likely it was already outdated, so nobody wanted to use it, right? So some people actually figured out that style guides are quickly turning into zombie style guides, so they exist somewhere as an artifact in an organization, but nobody uses them. So that's the style guides, right? Pattern library is just a part of the design system, right? Pattern library is a representation of different elements in your interface, of different items in your interface, and that's definitely part of a design system, but only part of it, right? Because it doesn't. So a UI pattern on its own, it's a definition of what is a standard set of items that you can use to build a new interface. But design system is a dynamic process, which means that product teams supposed to actually add to the system in the future, right? They actually should keep adding stuff to the system. And if you have just pattern library, they cannot do it, right, in a consistent way. So design system is truly empowering to the entire product organization, so they can keep adding stuff to their system, right?
Right.
Did I cover everything? Was there a question about these two terms, pattern library and?
Yep.
Okay.
That covers it. And the next question we have is, actually, these are a couple questions about this. How do you sell the value of a design system to a company where people are skeptical?
Yeah, so that depends on to whom you are selling the value. To developers, if you are selling the value to developers or top level engineering or technology leader, right? CTO, VP of engineering, maybe director of engineering. If this is the person that needs to approve, or is one of the people that who needs to approve the beginning of the process, then focus on reusability of all the assets, so reusability of code and modularity of the environment, right? And I bet you they will love it. Because what it comes down to is that it saves time during the development, right? That's the part of reusability. That's the value. Developers, instead of building every single thing from scratch, can continue to reuse pieces of code which are fully encapsulated, so they can be added anywhere in code. Right? That's one of the tasks of a team working on any design system, and it also improves the efficiency of the process post development or post-development before release, so really Q&A, right? So you can save time fixing bugs because you're using components that are well tested and quite often have automated tests for every single component, right? You can also save time on the communication front with designers, because designers and developers have this common platform to discuss patterns, right? They use the same stuff on both ends. So that saves a lot of time. And then finally, modularity of the code environment is just so much easier to maintain and also to just debug. If you have any bugs that happen in the without this modularity of the environment, it's a nightmare to find where code breaks. If you have individual small encapsulated components, it's much easier to manage, right? Now, that's one persona that typically companies are selling to when they're trying to encourage organizations to build a design system. Another one might be design leadership, which, I mean, from what I've heard, is much easier. I can see that why this is easier, because then you're pitching basically efficiency of the design process, right? It's much faster to build an interface if you have some set of ready building blocks, right? Or components. It's just so UI patterns is much easier. So you can pitch the efficiency, but also consistency of experience increases, and with which you can typically see an increase in user satisfaction. It's easier to find things in the interface that's fully consistent. The cognitive load is much lower, and that's just adding to the satisfaction of users.
Right. And since we are over time, we will take our last question here. And somebody had a question about the little demo you showed at the end. So can you explain a little bit more how do developers work in that environment with the designers in the design system that you showed UXPin?
Sure. So there are two ways developers can be engaged in the system. One is more passive, right? So a passive way in which developers work with this in this environment is that whenever they're getting a project created in UXPin or uploaded from Sketch to UXPin, documentation gets automatically attached to all the patterns, and developer always can see this information, right? So let's say that we are working on a landing page which was built with patterns from our design system, right? Developer is looking at this landing page, clicking on a button, and immediately she's getting an information about where this button is located in code. Like if that's React.js, we can get a name of a component, a definition of an import that's necessary to actually include this button, and description of all the props that can be used on this button. If that's a primary button, there might be a prop to actually add this styling. Now, if this is not a React.js environment and maybe the documentation is just touching the pure front end, we might have reference to classes, right? So again, front-end developers looking at the button on, and instead of thinking about there was a class in somewhere in code that we used to use to define this element, she can just see like, okay, this is the class that I supposed to use. So that's just helping with speed of development tremendously in our experience, right? Because everything is just automatically defined, and design does not need to actually write down this documentation every single time. It just stays in the system, which is ideal. So that's one way to work with that, right? So all the information necessary for development is always attached to every element in every project, and developers have easy access to this information. Now, the second way is to have developers being more active, in which they can actually come over to UXPin and define documentation for assets. So the rest of development, the engineering team, can use that, right? You can just get them on board to your UXPin accounts. They can go into editor, keep adding documentation. They can even keep working on patterns, because why not, right? After all, we are aiming at democratizing design and bringing developers and designers closer. So that's the more active way. We are more active as UXPin in that capacity, but definitely we see a huge benefit of actually having this design system documentation in context of every project, and that's so much different than what is currently available on the market. Meaning that in typical processing, like developer would need to go to an external site with a documentation of a design system and look for this information, right, to a particular pattern, which it's better than no documentation, but the time used to actually find every single thing in a documentation is just a waste, right? It's much better to have it available in context of a project.
Right. And with that being said, yeah, I think we will wrap up our session right here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And in a moment here, I will drop in a link for our virtual conference, which we just announced about, I would say, about 2 days ago. So in June, we are holding our Agile UX Virtual Summit. We are going to have a lot of great speakers from really cool companies like Google, Fjord, IBM, and more. We're going to have roughly 30 to 40,000 people registered for this. If you guys want, you can go ahead and register for free. I just dropped the link down there, and hope to see everybody there in roughly a month or so. It's going to be a really cool event with a lot of great speakers and topics, all focused on how to practice user experience in agile environments, which of course is a big challenge in today's organizations. And with that being said, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys in roughly a month or so.
Thank you all.
All right, take care.